name is Ben Gilbert, and I am a senior editor at Engadget, and we've got Paul Gallagher, the VP of Marketing from Pelican Imaging, and next to him we've got Shonil, your last name, sir? I'm going to leave it to you. Kolatkar, and you are the Senior Director of Product Planning for Samsung. And then to his left, we've got Avinash Dabir.
You got it.
I hope I'm not completely
that's pretty
brutalizing that. I'm just going to call you Avi, if that's okay.
That works.
During this, and you are the Director of Developer Relations for Leap Motion. So we're here to talk about gesture and alternate interfaces. So that could be anything from the Microsoft Kinect to the Samsung phones that have gestures and the Leap Motion, the device that people can use with their PCs. And Pelican, you guys work with various partners to kind of bring motion and alternate interfaces to a variety of products, right?
Right.
So just to kind of get things started, I'd love kind of a brief overview of what each of you guys do and how you came into this, how you got interested in alternate interfaces.
Okay, what Pelican Imaging does is we have created a new camera architecture. It's an array of low-resolution cameras. Essentially gives unprocessed, would give you a bug's eye view of an image. We then process the image to present a high-resolution image. But because each of the cameras is slightly shifted in space, we have parallax. And so just like your eye and your brain, from that we can get depth.
And parallax is the kind of
if you close one eye, you see the scene one way, and you close your other eye, it's shifted a little bit.
Absolutely.
But with this depth, and the other benefit is that our camera is about half the thickness of a conventional cell phone camera. This is generating a lot of interest in a lot of the small form factor camera space. And the reason this is very exciting is because the camera in your pocket is the same fundamental design as a camera designed in 1685. Very little has changed in the architecture of the camera in the last 450 years. Materials got better, accuracies got better, but it's the same fundamental design. And we're at a point now where you've gotten to a size that's so small that you're really causing physics problems. And Pelican, by leveraging this array of low-resolution cameras, we're able to exploit some of the issues related to this and present a high-resolution image with what we see are the next generation of interactions with your camera.
Okay, and Shonil, you guys have a more direct to consumer focus, right? With Paul and Pelican, they're direct to businesses and then to consumers. But with Samsung, it's people in the crowd, I'm sure, have those Samsung products on them in their pockets right now, right?
Yeah, hopefully every one of them has Samsung mobile products. But frankly, I mean, so I've been in the mobile industry for the last 15 years, right? In Motorola and Nokia and now Samsung. And over the last 4 or 5 years, it's been pretty amazing, right? The unprecedented growth in mobile, just the different, and when I talk about mobile, it's phones, it's tablets, it's now smartwatches as we see them. So it's just an amazing industry to be a part of. And Samsung, in a way, I'm really proud, is leading a lot of innovation in these spaces, especially when it comes to gestures and alternative kind of interfaces. Gone are the days of probably keyboard, mouse, or even like the touch input, right? Very soon.
Whoa.
There'll be whole new gestures.
Are we ready for that?
In 20 years.
Okay, all right.
We'll talk more about that, but
sure.
Really a good part to be a part of that industry.
Okay, and Avi, you guys are a little bit different than the two gentlemen here. You guys are focusing on a device that is a peripheral that you can add to a PC or a laptop, and you can play games with it. You can use it for various other software, right? So could you kind of give a background?
So we're a 100-person startup called Leap Motion. We're based in San Francisco, California. We make this device. It's about the size of a pack of gum. Here's an image of it, and it's kind of hard to see. I really I wanted to bring one with me, but I left it backstage. But you can find me after, and I'm happy to show it to you. But so this device has 2 cameras in there, 3 infrared LEDs, plugs into your Mac or PC, and it takes photos of your hand positions north of 200 frames per second, and we do some fancy processing with our proprietary software and return that into an SDK that developers can create motion-controlled apps with. So you can rotate things in 3D, you can sort of grab and move things around. If you want to zoom, you kind of just reach in forward. So really bring this idea of 3D input to computers, and computers are really just a start for us. We believe that this technology can really interact with any screen, whether that be a mobile phone, a tablet, a TV, whatever.
So you guys are all doing kind of different things, right? And I say this because I'm interested in where you see this stuff going. It's all really early, right? I'm still using a mouse every day. I'm still using a keyboard every day, despite where the future might be going. I'm really interested to hear about where you think this stuff makes the most sense. In terms of maybe it's a phone, maybe it's on your computer, maybe it's something completely different that I haven't thought of yet, right? Feel free to jump in.
So I think what you'll see is in a first generation is this will supplement the current way you interface to your platform, whether it's touchscreen, whether it's mouse. I mean, everyone's seen the Minority Report and they're moving stuff around. Do that for an hour. You do that every day, 8 hours a day, you're going to have shoulders like a linebacker, right? It's going to be built up a lot of muscle. So instead what I see is it's a supplement to the current interface to make it easier. So if you're not next to the mouse, if you're watching a video on the tablet and you're far enough away that you'd have to get up and you're not within hand reach, I see that as potential. But what I also see as potential is in situations where you don't want to touch the device. So if you're working on an oil platform, you're a greasy mess. You don't necessarily want to be touching these electronics, right? In the military, there's certain situations where you got to be able to do things, and you can't start pulling stuff out, and your hands are busy with other things. You need to be able to do this in other ways. So what I think in the first instantiation is this will supplement the current interface modes, and it'll start to work out to. Will it replace the mouse? Maybe, maybe not. But I think there will be certain things that people would prefer to do, especially as you see the increased adoption of tablets, where the interaction of the PC is very different than the interaction of the tablet. This is the potential to bridge those two.
So were you going to say something, Shimon?
Yeah,
Sorry.
just to add to that, I think the potential for gesture is huge, right? So you asked about where it will probably be more useful. I think it could be pervasive throughout the consumer's lives. So you talk about, of course, the mobile devices, but then you talk about home entertainment. And then beyond that, you can talk about healthcare use cases where the doctor is using some of these, right, to do a better job in his surgery, or connected cars potentially, or automotive. So again, the breadth of industries which this can span will be tremendous. But I think what will be important for that is these gestures really need to be really simple. I think three things: simple, efficient, and more, or either immersive. And what I mean by that is really simplicity in terms of the human and machine interaction, right? So the traditional methods, we are used to going through the whole navigation systems and menu systems and a lot of interaction with the machine. But with these alternative gestures, what you're finding is that boundaries are getting very thin, where in a quick glance or in a quick gesture, I can communicate with the machine in a way, right, and be part of that.
Right.
And when I talk about immersive, what Leap is doing, or what Samsung Smart TV is doing, is really bringing the human as part of that content as well, right? And be it gaming, for example, has huge potential for gestures as well.
Sure, sure.
So those
this
are
is something we had talked about a little
cases.
bit actually backstage in terms of I think that the most ready example in terms of the Samsung is I can't remember the name of it. It's where you're looking at it and you look away and it knows it's active.
Right. Smart pause.
Smart pause, yeah.
Smart actions, yeah.
Exactly. So that's the kind of thing that I think that human aspect is there, right? Where that's something that it's implicit with, you don't have to do anything. It just happens when you look away, it knows, and that's huge, right? Like that has that immediate, obvious implication on a personal level. But I think a lot of times the stuff that we've seen so far is very early and might seem forced, right? And I guess I'm most interested in figuring out where that stuff is working for you guys so far. What makes the most sense? What has worked the best?
Yeah, for us, the things we have an app store. There's over 120 apps in there, all made specifically for motion control. And the things that we see are the most successful are, like you said, things that are better with motion control. Not everything is best to do, right? And part of it too is the interface isn't necessarily designed for motion and gesture control, right? Like if you want to click that small X to close that window, you need to be really like precise and get in there, but
You need a high precision
yes,
device with your hand, right? Like a
right.
mouse.
So but the interface needs to change because it can be better. It can
Right.
be more efficient. You know,
Right.
for example, you know, we sort of talk about this in the office a lot, is like let the software kind of meet you halfway. So if I want something and I start to point to it, why can't it come closer to me? Is it starting to interpret my intentions, right, and helping me out? And you can make more powerful software that way. And the things that really work in our app store right now are things that let you play, create, and explore. Like that's very much what we're seeing a lot of people flock to in terms of those things. So whether it's a game or some sort of art and design tool where it's easier to just draw with your finger, or you know, you want to explore something, you want to dissect a skull or the human body and you can pull it apart and move it around. That's been very successful right now for us.
Okay. So the kind of difference between something like Leap Motion and a Pelican device or something like we see from Samsung is that I think there's more of a gaming. That's the kind of initial focus that we've seen with Leap or Connect or other various devices like this. I guess I'm interested in finding out where you see that innovation coming from outside of that, right? Like the gaming aspect seems the most obvious, perhaps, right? Like that's another interface. There's a huge world of developers who will experiment with software for that, so you can kind of test it. Where else? Like you said, I think the most interesting aspect you said from Pelican was the kind of army or the oil rig kind of it.
Right. So
right?
I think what you're seeing is a couple things. One is that the interaction. You know, right now there's no real set of motions
Right.
to drive commands, and this is actually one of the problems with the industry. You know, as you had said earlier, you know, you can't just click it. Well, we actually were in a previous professional life, worked on a time-of-flight sensor, and we literally learned you can't just click it because your finger doesn't hit the same place twice if it's not holding something. And so you wound up not ever being able to click it twice. So you have to come up with new ways, whether it's a pinch or whether it's some type of grab to launch an icon. But as we look into some of these other markets, what we see is, you know, what we're talking about here is how to have a system interact with you and be able to understand what your intent is as you're starting to do something. And that's where I think there's going to be a lot of benefit. Are you looking at the TV? This was something we were talking about earlier, is you know, voice recognition systems for your TV. Well, if you're not looking at the TV shouldn't be processing this information. It shouldn't be trying to understand or you're trying to give it a command. It should be saying, just like a person, you look at them and you speak to them. Right? So if you're not looking at the TV, don't try to understand. So if I look away and I say DVD, that doesn't mean launch the DVD player. And so this is where I think you're going to start seeing this ability with having a knowledge of the scene, having a deep level of knowledge that's easily processed at the front end. So you're not talking about, you know, gigaflops of processing to try to get stuff done, just to get a starting point to understand what you want to do, is where I think you're going to see the first really rich level of interaction with this.
I think at least for Samsung, how we look at it is, again, at least in Samsung Mobile US, we have the pulse of the US consumer, right? So we're very obsessed with the consumer, what they're doing, in a nice way, of course, what they're doing, what their behavior is, what their pain points is, and how do we resolve that. So we are actually looking at gestures to solve certain pain points for them. For example, and these really come alive in use cases. For example, if you're driving, right? You don't want to, if you get a call, you don't want to go about poking your phone and miss a turn. Or
especially without buttons, right? Like this has been a huge problem with touch interfaces for me as driving is.
Absolutely.
Phones are no more.
Absolutely. With voice is a great example, right? You can accept the call, you can just hover and do a gesture to receive that. The other use cases could be, and these are some very interesting use cases that we have seen consumers do now when we have introduced gestures, is like while taking a selfie photo. Right? As you take a selfie photo, the camera shakes.
Sure.
So we don't want to click the camera button, for example. So we are using voice there. You can say click or smile, and it automatically takes a picture. So some very interesting use cases have come alive through these gestures.
I'm now terrified of my phone auto-taking photos of me while I smile or do other nefarious things. Who knows?
That's true.
So actually, if you go back to what you said about automotive, actually Honda has a really interesting patent. They have a patent where what the patent describes is watching someone's hands as they touch buttons. But the buttons have no electrical contact. So you get the tactile feedback of the button, but there's nothing behind the button.
Right.
The camera is actually now taking that action and translating it into a command. I thought that was a very elegant patent that put together, because you get the tactile feedback. It's a modality you're used to, but they save a ton of money in wire harnessing.
So this is actually a great point that you bring up, because I wanted to touch on the tactile feedback. Pun not intended, guys. But so that seems like the biggest hump to overcome, right? I grew up with tactile interfaces, whether it's computers or televisions or whatever, phones, and I've gotten used to a different interface on my phone, but I still haven't really gotten used to using voice and gestures and stuff for commanding my television or other interfaces. And how do you get past that? Is it just a fidelity question? Is it re-educating customers? Is it as people grow up, they get used to it, or?
Yeah, I think very much so. I mean, even when the iPhone first came out and people were like, oh, I need the buttons, I need to feel pressing the buttons, and you know, that
the BlackBerry lovers, holding on.
But now, you know, it's everywhere now.
Right.
You don't have the buttons to press, and you know, I think like I have a 4-year-old niece, and she's so used to swiping things, she tries to swipe open our screen door. but that's just what she grew up doing, and that's what she knows.
Right.
She's gonna grow up in a world where buttons don't exist.
You got to pinch to zoom in a magazine.
Yeah, and you know, I think we'll just get used to it. Is we'll learn. You know, companies like these guys, and hopefully us as well, and a lot of other ones will help educate the consumers on, you know, where it's going.
I think this also gets back to the UI.
Sure.
Right. So maybe it is a pinch, and literally your tactical is your own fingers, and it's positionally where you're getting it. Or maybe you're paging things by going like this, where it's not I have to touch something anymore. It's how am I moving? I mean, a lot of people speak with moving their hands around.
Sure.
Right. And they're not getting tactile feedback, but they're presenting a lot of information in doing that. And I think this is what I was talking about earlier about there is no unified UI yet. And I think this is part of the problem, is how do I address this? I'm used to a tactical feedback. I'm used to a way to interact, and this may be something that's totally different. And how do you get it to be natural?
Sure.
And I think another aspect to consider is also which category of devices will that be more prevalent in, right?
Yeah.
For example, in wearables category, we have a lot of gestures incorporated where if I twist my wrist, it automatically starts the gear and it shows me the time and notification. So in some of these categories, some old paradigms, touch may work, but the keypad definitely doesn't work, right, on the watch. So some of these will really push the boundaries and probably take gestures to the next level for us as well.
Okay. So the other thing I think that is I think there's a big barrier to get past in terms of business. Business interactions, the way that people use computers on a business level, I don't know that gesture or voice or any of that stuff necessarily makes sense for spreadsheets, right? And it seems like business is a huge driver for the way that people use this stuff, or how it becomes part of, I mean, the mouse and keyboard came from, I mean, business applications, right? So how do you break into that market as well, right? Like that seems like the other side of the coin. The consumer side, it seems like I get it. Whereas the business side, it's like, I don't know that it makes sense there. Does it make sense there? Maybe it doesn't.
I mean, I think it does. It depends on the use case. And you touched a little bit about the oily hands, or you know, with hazardous material. We've seen the Leap Motion controller it's already being used in operating rooms. So, you know, a surgeon doesn't have to break sterility by touching a keyboard or mouse. You know, if they want to get to the next MRI or whatever it is that they're looking at, they can just use a gesture to swipe to the next one. So there's certainly use cases out there where it can be used, and over time, I think it'll start sort of at those specialized use cases, and then sort of trickle its way down into everyone's sort of daily workflow. And another big sort of use case for us too is like people who are creating 3D materials, right? So whether you're a game designer creating 3D art assets, or you know, you're working in CAD and you're designing, you know, a new spaceship. Like Elon Musk used the Leap Motion controller to demonstration of rotating a 3D CAD model around. So it's making its way into the business field.
So, I mean, this goes back to my first point, which is when it first comes out, I think it'll be supplemental, right? So a really easy example for business is you're seeing more and more multi-screen desktops. Right? And so, okay, I'm going to be moving stuff around on the screens, right? I got to take my mouse, I got to grab it, I got to drag it, versus just a swipe, right? So I think there's going to be some of this where it starts where you're going to have this where you're going to have layers of open windows, and you want to reach through and pull something forward, or you want to move something out of the way.
Sure.
And that's what I mean by as a supplemental as it first comes out. It's something pretty simplistic from a gesture perspective, but a bit of a pain right now with a mouse and keyboard.
So the last kind of thing I wanted to touch on is the vocabulary that we're using for actually using these gesture interfaces. We kind of understand the pinch or maybe a swipe, and there's some kind of standards in terms of the things that we do and that are standards across all of these devices, whether it's Samsung or Leap or Microsoft's Kinect or whatever else. How do we begin to establish those standards? Are you guys going to all get together after this and have lunch and start talking about it? But I don't know. How do we start working towards that?
You know, so one thing that's sort of worked for us is, you know, we're 100 people, but there's more than just 100 of us working on this, right? We have 80,000 plus developers signed up for our SDK, and they're helping define what these gestures are. And you'll see that based on the software that they create, the best ones will trickle to the top, and that'll really sort of help set the standards. And people will use what they feel like makes sense and is best for them. I think it's still kind of too early to say, hey, this is how you should do it.
Sure.
You still need some time to figure out what works and what doesn't. You know, in general, you're like you're saying, using swipes. You need a swipe. You need a select to deselect.
Right.
So these basic functions that you need.
And I think the better the gestures are able to mimic kind of the user's current behavior, the more successful they'll be, right? So rather than having to relearn a whole new language, in a way, it need not be a computer language, but in this case, a gesture is kind of the barrier. So the more similar you do in terms of what you do in actual life, like picking up your wrist or really swiping, or that will really, those will be successful. And again, definitely the developers and the creativity in the community will help bring those up as well.
Yeah, it's okay. So I look forward to the future and seeing where this stuff all ends up. It's right now we're kind of just at the beginning, but we'll see where it goes from all three of you guys in the next 20 years or so, right? All right. Thanks very much. Yeah, hopefully sooner, right? All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you.